the machine that saved a nation and devoured its soldiers. On the frozen battlefields of Eastern Europe, where mudblood and steel blended into one single color, there was a machine that shaped the very fate of the war, the T-34. It was praised as the pride of the Red Army, the symbol of the Soviet Union's boundless industrial might. But behind the medals and the triumphant photographs lies a brutal truth. More than 57,000 T-34-85s were destroyed, nearly equal to the combined number of tanks built by Germany and Britain. How could a machine celebrated as the best tank of World War II also be the most destroyed? Was its glory built upon the blood of those who drove it? Or did the very doctrine of victory through numbers turn every T-34 into a human bullet, another cog in the vast grinding wheel of war? Today we peel back the steel plating of that legend, not just to understand a machine, but to confront the real cost of victory. Because within that armor lies more than metal and shell fire. It holds ambition, fear, and the true price of triumph. In the world of war machines, few names are both revered and haunted, quite like the T-34. The Soviets hailed it as a national pride, yet history remembers it as the steel coffin of tens of thousands of young soldiers. Over 40,000 units were destroyed, a number so staggering that it cannot be explained by tactics or luck alone. So what lies beneath that legend? Was it a triumph of engineering genius, or the blood-soaked price of victory by sheer numbers? When the roar of the T-34's engine echoed across the flaming plains of Eastern Europe, it heralded not only the strength of the Soviet Union, but also the unbearable cost of its glory. This is the story of a symbol that saved a nation while burying an entire generation. A legend born of steel, yet forged in human suffering. To understand the T-34, we must return to the years when the Soviet Union began turning dreams into steel and steel into power. After 1929, as the Soviet Union plunged into a frenzy of industrialization, Joseph Stalin understood one crucial truth. In the age of machines, the military might no longer rest in men, but in steel. He pursued a daring vision to create a doctrine of total war, where victory would belong to the side with more tanks moving faster and hitting harder. Unashamed to learn from the West, the Soviets purchased blueprints of the British Vickers and American Christie tanks, dissecting, improving, and copying them. The result was a series of early models, the T-26 and the BT series, fast and mobile, yet as fragile as paper before enemy guns. They were the first steps forward, but also a warning speed could never replace survivability. Amid this realization emerged a new name, Mikhail Koshkin, a young engineer who believed the Soviet Union could design a tank of its own. He wasn't merely building a machine, he was laying the foe, Endation for a new philosophy of warfare, one where steel and will became one. And out of the smoke and roar of Soviet industry, that dream began to take shape, a dream called T-34. In the mid-1930s, as Europe seethed in an arms race, the Soviet Union bet everything on a daring idea, a tank that could be fast, powerful, and cheap enough to produce by the thousands. From the prototype, A-20 engineer Mikhail Koshkin began testing a design the world had never seen before: sloped armor, which caused enemy shells to glance off instead of punching through. But the technology was still immature, and the project nearly died in its cradle. Then in 1938, the Battle of Lake Khasan proved what theory alone could not: thin armor and weak guns meant death. From that failure, Koshkin returned to his drawing board and gave birth to the T-34, a tank that perfectly balanced speed, firepower, and survivability, a true revolution in mechanized warfare. And in a cruel twist of fate, it was Germany, the very enemy once terrified by it, that later copied its sloped armor for the Panther and Tiger II. A creation born of desperation had gone on to reshape the entire course of 20th century warfare. In 1941, when war crashed upon the Soviet borders, the T-34 appeared like a nightmare to the invading Germans, fast, fierce, thickly armored, and armed with a gun beyond anything the Wehrmacht had. But the tragedy lay elsewhere. The Soviets had fewer than 900 of them, most handed to crews who had barely learned how to survive. Their training lasted only 72 hours, not enough to understand the machine, let alone master it. Inside the cockpit, only a handful of tanks carried radios. The rest relied on signal flags and hand gestures, turning entire formations into chaos once battle began. Amid the smoke and thunder, those signals vanished, and the T-34s, though superior to every German tank of the time, were isolated, encircled, and destroyed, one by one. A perfect machine could not save an army unprepared for war. The problem was never the steel or the engine, it was the human inside. And that was the bitter paradox of the T-34, built to win, yet doomed by the very hands that guided it. Beneath that seemingly invincible armor, the T-34 hid a painful truth. The cramped two-man turret forced the commander to both fight and lead to load shells, while trying to read the battlefield, a burden of life and death. Inside, the suffocating hull visibility was almost non-existent. Many crews said they fought in the darkness of their own tank. Its sloped armor, rushed through mass production, often suffered from poor metallurgy, cracking or shattering under fire, sending shards of steel slicing through its own crew. When flames erupted, the onboard fire extinguisher spewed carbon tetrachloride gas, saving the tank but poisoning its men. And even escape was nearly impossible. The hatch, heavy as a tombstone, sealed their fate. On average, 2 men died for every T-34 destroyed. So one must ask, was this still a weapon? Or a steel coffin forged from faith and desperation? As war devoured Europe, the Soviet Union realized it could not win through finesse. Only sheer numbers could save the nation. The giant factories of the Western territories lay in ruins under German bombs, So thousands of workers, engineers, and entire steel assembly lines were uprooted and moved beyond the Ural Mountains into a land of freezing cold and scarcity, but safe from the Luftwaffe. There they worked around the clock 24 hours a day, not for glory, but for survival. In those so-called ghost factories, the workforce, mostly women and children, labored ceaselessly on freezing steel floors. Seats were cut from cockpits, welds were rough, and rushed camouflage paint was skipped to ensure the next T-34 rolled to the front as fast as possible. The result, costs fell by 40% and production soared to 200 tanks per month, an almost impossible figure amid wartime chaos. Was it madness or the genius of desperation? The Soviet Union didn't build the best tank. It built a flood of steel that could not be stopped. And in that tide, victory was not forged by perfection, but by the will to survive of an entire people. By 1943, the great duel between steel and strategy entered a new and brutal phase. The days when the Germans were shocked by the T-34 were over. They had learned, adapted, and built new weapons to counter it. The long-barreled 75mm guns, the sleek and deadly Panther tanks, and the relentless Stug assault guns now dominated the battlefield. Their shells tore through the once invincible sloped armor of the Soviet tank with cold precision. For the Red Army, the message was clear: evolve or be erased. The Soviets experimented with a new model, the T-43, heavier armor, thicker plating, but slower, clumsier, and ultimately a dead end. Time was running out, and the front lines demanded a solution that could fight today, not tomorrow. So the engineers didn't start from scratch, they outthought the problem. They expanded the turret ring, mounted a powerful 85mm gun, and redesigned the turret to fit a 3-man crew. The commander could finally command, the gunner could focus on his target, and the loader could keep the weapon alive in combat. The result was the T-34, not just an upgrade, but a rebirth. It carried a commander's cupola for visibility, a turret basket for stability, and a gun that could stand toe-to-toe with the German Panther. From that point forward, the T-34 was no longer just the tank of mass production. It became a symbol of adaptation proof that even amid ruin and fire, innovation could turn defeat into momentum, and that a nation's will to survive could forge steel sharper than any weapon on Earth. As the war drew to its final act, the Soviet Union no longer fought by sheer mass alone. Years of blood and fire had taught them how to move, as one artillery, infantry, and armor, striking together in a single, unstoppable rhythm. This was the essence of the deep battle doctrine, a vision of warfare, where the T-34, or Spasiana Sincestra, the T-34 was no longer just a tank, but the heartbeat of an army rolling inexorably westward. Caked in mud and soot, Soviet crews clung to their T-34s as they thundered toward Berlin. Behind them lay the ruins of a continent. Ahead, the fading light of an era. The machine, once mocked as a mobile coffin, now roared as a symbol of victory, not because it was perfect, but because it endured, adapted, and never stopped learning, even in the crucible of hell. Every scar on its armor told a story of survival. Every dent was proof that it had fallen, risen, and kept moving. In the end, what could be stronger than a machine that refuses to die? The T-34 had answered that question on the battlefields of Europe. It showed that in war, triumph doesn't belong to the flawless or the mighty. It belongs to those who stand back up again and again until there is no one left to stand against them. The T-34 was never a perfect machine. It was a monument to the price of victory. Over 40,000 destroyed tens of thousands of soldiers entombed within its burning hulls, yet their sacrifice forged its legend. It triumphed not through precision, but because it was born of desperation, driven by men who had no choice but to move forward. Perhaps no other machine has ever carried so much blood and tears in its steel. And strangely, this weapon of the 20th century still lives on into the 21st, serving in over 40 nations from Africa to the Middle East. Why has a design born in war endured so long? Maybe because it was never just metal. It was the embodiment of human will, fragile, yet unyielding, flawed, yet undefeated. T-34 of victory, written in blood and in the unbreakable belief that while steel may rust, the human spirit never does.